It's a remarkable adventure. Okay, starting again. Sorry, it's just starting the recording. The Jewish history is a remarkable adventure of the Jewish people, and to perhaps to quote the famous interaction between Otto von Bismarck and uh, no, sorry, it was between Louis the something and Blaise Pascal. He was looking for a give me a proof of a modern miracle, and Pascal said to them, "The Jews, my liege, the Jews." So the idea that Jewish history is its own miracle, and that there is something really remarkable and inspiring, if you will, Jewish identity building about Jewish history, that is the aim, to reveal that in these lectures. We try to deal with sort of digestible units in each lecture. They're about an hour long. And last year we started with Joshua crossing the Jordan, and after Joshua crossed the Jordan, then we had a lecture on the period of the Judges. We had King David, Solomon, building of the temple. We went through various other periods in Jewish history, leading us up to the destruction of the first temple. Then we did the return of Ezra and Nehemiah. We dealt with the period of the Maccabees. We dealt with the period leading up to the destruction of the second temple, and even the destruction of the second temple. And now we are at the period that really we're going to bridge a little bit before and a little bit after, but we're looking at a particular figure tonight, and that figure is Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. And in many ways, maybe equal with Ezra. When we studied Ezra, I said that Ezra was probably the single most influential and important personality that you've never heard of or you've never really studied. Yochanan Ben Zakkai stands right up there with Ezra in terms of his ability to repackage Judaism in the wake of some very significant challenges. So, without any further introduction, let's go to Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So, the story of Yochanan Ben Zakkai, perhaps let's start with the fact that I have a shul president on this particular episode, that he hopefully appreciates how difficult it is to manage the congregation. There are a lot of personalities in a synagogue. Ben Gurion was famous for having said to Roosevelt that, or maybe it was Truman rather, that you're president of 100 million people. I'm president of 1 million presidents. So this is a very ancient phenomenon, and the Jews were a very independent-minded people, and they were difficult to rule. There is a sort of a famous personality at the time of Yochanan Ben Zakkai and of Vespasian. This is Apollonius of Tyana. He's sort of a wonder-working philosopher. He's kind of the Rebbe to Vespasian and other people who lived at that time. He's a very important intellectual force in the Roman Empire. And what he said, he refused to set foot in Israel during the Roman siege of Jerusalem. Why? Because the people of Israel were so unruly and had such a reputation for being difficult. And what's interesting is that Vespasian was very, very deferential to Apollonius, and he said that he wished to be ruled by wise men, not to rule them. And he promised even the Egyptians, when he said, "You may draw upon me as upon the Nile." And yet Vespasian was the person who ultimately sieges Jerusalem, and his son Titus burns the temple. And this sort of shows you that there was a resistance amongst the Romans to be heavy-handed, to act with overreaching authority. So you have to see that as much as we may have this sort of idea of the Romans as evil, which they may well have been, the way in which the Romans wanted to manage was more of a hands-off way. They liked to collect their taxes and not be overburdening to the populations. But there was something going on in Israel that was very tense. because Jews felt that there was a promise that God had given the land of Israel to them, and who was today's Roman emperor to take that away, right? The Jews had conquered Pharaoh, they had conquered Nebuchadnezzar, they had conquered Sancherib. Who were these Roman, Johnny-come-latelys to do anything to them? And they had this very deep-seated belief that things were going to were going to change in Israel. I couldn't resist a little bit of political humor. This is my collection of Jews for Trump and Jews for Biden paraphernalia. What does this tell you? This tells you that there are Jews that are very pro-Trump and there are Jews that are very pro-Biden, right? So it's a little hard sometimes to say that there is one particular reality about the Jewish people, right? There is the Jewish people are divided politically, and guess what? What's true today was true back then. So let's just look back in the days of the destruction of the temple, the period in which Yochanan Ben Zakkai lives, and what does it tell us? So first of all, there were a couple of different political parties. Let's start with the Sadducees, the Tzedukim. The Tzedukim, these are largely people who are made up from the priestly class. They're the Kohanim. They are the aristocracy. They hold a lot of the wealth, but I think it's fair to say that they had a lot of trouble managing the population. They were sufficiently distant from your rank and file Jew that they weren't successful like other aristocracies in other places at managing the serfs, if you will, the plebiscite beneath them. And so there was a bit of a failure of leadership in that group. They were happy to take the money, didn't really do the leadership. They were, once again, largely people who were associated with the temple. The Tzedukim, the Sadducees, they were very pro-Roman. Things were good for them under the Romans. The Romans ensured that they still had, that their class was protected, that financially they were secure, politically they were secure. Things were good for them. You then have another group of people who are called the Biryonim. The Biryonim are the zealots, and they were violently against Rome. They, again, like I said before, they had this very fierce idea that you might see a remnant of it in the way which the Talmud presents the idea of freedom. Talmud has this idea of freedom, which is Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim. For me, b'nei Yisrael are avadim. To me, the children of Israel are servants. V'lo avadim la'avadim. They're not servants of servants. So this is the theological disposition that makes slavery forbidden in Jewish law. There are lots of interesting halachic ramifications about what kind of contracts you can write for people and whether a worker is allowed to quit in the middle of the day. Those are the halachic ramifications. But it's very possible that during the time of the Second Temple, the way the people understood this was that you cannot have an intermediate political authority between yourself and God. That the idea of an intermediate political authority between yourself and God, that is an anathema to the way in which Judaism is run. And if that's the case, so they felt that it would also be a promise from God that he will take care of the Romans too. God took care of Pharaoh, God took care of Nebuchadnezzar, God took care of Sancherib, God took care of Sisera, God took care of all these, he took care of Haman. All of these problems have gone away. And so, excuse me one second, I'm just going to close my door. I think I need an on-air sign for my
good luck with that.
My home. Okay, so now we have those two parties. We have the extreme zealots, the Sadducees. we have two more political parties to talk about. One is the sectarians. You have the sectarians, which ultimately are people like the Christians, the Dead Sea sect, the Essenes. They're all perhaps related and interwoven with each other, but they're people who are basically saying, look, they're the transcendental meditation party. They're the ones who say, look, all are corrupt. You're all, forget it. I don't want to have anything to do with any of you. We're going to go move to, I don't know, like the Queen Charlotte Island, and I'm gonna move to the Queen Charlotte's, and the rest of you can all eat yourselves alive. So they were a group that tended to live very much on the margins. They lived by themselves. The last group to talk about is the last group that we should talk about. Oops, let me just go back. Is the Pharisees, the Prushim. They're a very important group to talk about. Why are they so important to talk about? They're so important to talk about because the Prushim are the rabbis. They are the people that we see in the Talmud. Now, that group was divided, and we'll see it. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on them later. They're divided politically, but there certainly are amongst them those who are very pro-peace. That would be Yochanan Ben Zakkai is one of them. We're going to see that, and there are others who are more hawkish. So let's take a look at those two groups in a little bit more depth. Okay, the doves. And a good example of a statement that is attributed to the doves is Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim Omer. Rabbi Chanina, the vice Kohen, would say, Hevei mitpalel b'shlomo shamachut, pray for the integrity of the government. Could be also the welfare of the government. She'ilmale mora'ah, for without the fear of government, ish et re'ehu chaim bal'a'o. That if without that, people will devour each other without the government. Now, if you want to just see what that looks like, go to your local neighborhood hurricane when the glass shatters in all the shops and people start to loot because they know the government is not going to come there. Go to Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein, and people just went and pillaged the Museum of Antiquities. So there is something to this. This statement also, by the way, in 1933, 1935, if you went to a shul in Hamburg or in Frankfurt, they probably said a prayer for the Nazi government. And the reason they did that is because of this statement. But we're not reading this right now as a halachic statement. We're reading it as a historical statement. The historical statement says, hey, wait a minute. Rabbi Chanina, the Skana Kohanim, said, hey, you guys may not like Rome, but we should accommodate Rome. We should deal with Rome because they're keeping the peace. They're preventing they're preventing wholesale looting. There's what to respect there. So that's an example of something that we find of the Dovish party. Another piece of evidence is Josephus tells us that the Pharisees were among those who tried to talk people out of joining the rebels in 66 CE. So there is Josephus tells us that the rabbis really were very pragmatic and wanted to distance the people from those who were acutely interested in war. He also tells us, by the way, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Sanhedrin, so he gave his support to the warring faction against Rome. This piece of evidence is understood by I would say, I guess, the contemporary scholars to mean that what happened was that as soon as there were victories in the early stages of the rebellion, so Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel threw himself in with the rebels because now things are looking a little bit better from that side. So perhaps you could say the Pharisees were moderates. Some of them leaned towards peace. Others may have been more inclined, if there was a reasonable vision of some kind of arrangement with Rome that would have been bolstered by some of the acts of rebellion, to stand behind them. Let's look at the hawks. The hawks, this is a famous piece of Gemara. I say it's famous because it's the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the cave, and the whole Lag BaOmer celebration comes out of this Gemara. But we're just going to look at one little piece of it, and the little piece we're looking at about it is one section of the. I can give you the Hebrew again for a second. One section of this Talmud deals with an argument about whether or not the Romans are good for people or not. And so Rabbi Yehuda, he starts off and he says, oh, how pleasant are the actions of the nations, of the Romans, right? They made marketplace, they established bridges, they established bathhouses. This, by the way, is a bit of a historical fact. The Pax Romana was an incredibly prosperous period of time. Even when these different independent states throughout the Roman Empire, which stretched from Egypt to Afghanistan, the Roman Empire brought greater stability to even independent vassal states, because they didn't have to worry about kings flipping back and forth and minor petty palace squabbles, and they didn't have to worry about any of those things. And you have this incredible period of time where you could send goods from one end of Asia to Europe without worrying about things, because the Romans essentially built roads and policed them. So it was a great thing to have for people. This idea that the Romans established roads and trade, this was a gift of prosperity to the world. Now, if that's your meter stick, the Romans did do some really great things. But some of the rabbis had a very different opinion of the Romans. What did they have to say? So they said as follows. Everything that the Romans did, they established for their own purposes. Marketplace, why they make marketplaces? So they could put prostitution in there. Bathhouses, that's their own luxury. Bridges, they just did that to collect taxes. Now, I know this seems like a scene out of like some Monty Python movie, but what this tells you is that amongst the rabbis, there were some who were exceedingly suspicious of the Romans, and they very much leaned towards the party that wanted to expel the Romans from Jerusalem, and certainly from Judea. And so you see the rabbis sort of sit in the middle, but they lean. There's the doves and the hawks. Okay, here's our central figure today. The title was Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai says as follows. He's Haya Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai Omer. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai used to say, Al tivahel listor bamot goyim. Don't get too excited about destroying the altars of the non-Jews. Right? Somebody puts up a Zeus, somebody puts up a Mercury next door. Don't go home, get your baseball bat, and knock it down. Why? Shelo tibane biyadcha shelo tistor shel levenim v'yomer lecha aseh lecha shel avanim. Because what's going to happen? You're going to make one that the original Mercury may have been made out of stone, and they're going to tell you to make it out of bricks, or it was made out of plaster, and they're going to tell you to make it out of silver and gold. What's going to happen is there's going to be a counterproductive reaction. Now, what's fascinating about this is if you read the book of Devarim, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, you will discover in Deuteronomy that the Torah is very clear. The Torah tells you that, at Matzevotam Tishaberun, you shall destroy their altars. It's a biblical commandment. And Rabbi Yochanan he's a pragmatist, perhaps more than anything else. And in this statement, you see his kind of peaceful pragmatism. His peaceful pragmatism is, you guys are getting yourselves into real problems. If you're going to make it your raison d'etre to destroy every image of idol worship that you see, then you're going to have real problems. This could be something which is a bit of a veiled reference to the fact that there were very violent reactions to the images of Caesar that would be put on the uniforms of Roman centurions. There were different kind of uniforms for centurions, and there was a general agreement between Rome and the Jewish population not to station guards that would have that kind of an emblem in Jerusalem itself. Pontius Pilate was actually one of those, and we've covered that in previous sessions, that violated that sort of agreement. This statement of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai might reference the fact, think about how many people died trying to protect Jerusalem against this incidental idol worship of an emblem on the shoulder of a Roman centurion. So don't get overly worked up about this stuff. Take a pragmatic approach, because you don't want to end up in a position that puts you at a deficit to where you were previously. There's also another beautiful example of his pragmatism, and I have two ways of reading this. I'll tell you what the statement is. The statement is that if you have a sapling in your hand and you hear that Mashiach has come, plant the sapling and then go see Mashiach. Right? So the idea is not, oh, Mashiach came, drop everything, run to Mashiach. That was not who Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was. He was like, okay, first take care of business. You have a sapling in your hand, that's food for your family for the next month, plant it. The other way to read this is that during this period of time, there were so many Meshugana people claiming to be Mashiach that Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was saying, I've been there. I've done this dance a couple times, right? And some of you may recognize some of the names of some of them. That gentleman from Nazareth, as to be just one example of that. So Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was a pragmatist. He was one who said, don't get overly wrapped up in your messianism. Don't get overly wrapped up in destroying various pieces of avodah zarah, of idol worship. Okay. Now, just a little bit more. Okay, where have we been? We've just described the political landscape. That there were doves who liked supporting Rome. There were hawks who wanted to get rid of Rome. And there were the prushim, the rabbis, who sat in the middle. And amongst the rabbis, there was division between themselves. There were some rabbis, like Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, who represented the peace and wanting to preserve the peace. And there were other rabbis, like maybe Rabban Gamliel, who wanted to advance the concept of the zealots and perhaps trying to push back against Rome. Now we're going to look a little bit more carefully at the life of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai and who he was before the destruction. So first of all, we know that he was an important person, and he represented the rabbis to the Sadducees, and we also know that he eliminated certain temple practices, for example, the waters of the Sota. The Talmud says that, adultery became such a common practice that Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was very worried about what would happen. And so he was very worried about the use of the waters of the Sota, and so he eliminated that practice in the temple. Again, the waters of the Sota were a temple ritual used as a para-juridical method of determining if someone had been adulterous. I remind you, before you get your hackles up about that particular concept, that in the biblical times, the kinds of honor killings that you occasionally hear about in Pakistan, in the Middle East, those were normal. And so if somebody suspected his wife or his daughter of doing adultery, that was usually a DIY capital sentence. And that was obviously something that could be a real problem. And so the Torah introduces a way in which there is a much slower and perhaps more calm-inducing evaluation of such things. And I would imagine that there were actually very few people who were found guilty through the Mei Sota, the waters of the Sota. But back to Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So he is someone who has an important presence even before the temple. And here's a document it's called the Midrash Tanaim, and it tells us about the fact that a certain individual says that he went up to Jerusalem, to a certain place in Jerusalem. Matzati shamet Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. I found Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is the head of the Sanhedrin. That Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and Yochanan ben Zakkai, v'shtei migilot ptuchot lifnehen, and there are two scrolls open before them. And Yochanan Sofer is sitting in front of them, and he's writing. And we have one that goes to the Galil and one that goes to the south. And we see that Rabbi Yochanan's position here is that he's not the top of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's sort of the deputy chief of the Sanhedrin. So he's an important person, but does not occupy the top position. This is the example of the Sota, just showing you the text. When the adulterers multiply, the ceremony of the bitter waters ceased, and it was Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai who discontinued it. As it is said, I will not punish their daughters for fornicating, nor their daughters-in-law for committing adulteries, for they themselves turn aside with whores and sacrifice with prostitutes. So he basically says, if the men are not going to be acting so righteous, I'm not going to enforce the laws of the Sota. So that's just a little background about Rabbi Yochanan. But now we have to deal with perhaps the most important story of Rabbi Yochanan, the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Vespasian. Vespasian is the Roman general. So you may already know parts of this story. This is Rabbi Yochanan faking his own death. I'm going to present to you, tedious as it may be, two separate accounts of the same story. They emphasize slightly different things, and I couldn't decide which one to use, so I'm going to use both of them. I'm going to try and run through them reasonably quickly so nobody gets too bored. Okay, the first one is from Avot de Rabbi Natan. Avot de Rabbi Natan is a text very much like Pirkei Avot, what you might call the first principles of Judaism. These Avot are collected by Rabbi Natan, and they include somewhat of an expanded ideas in these areas. Okay, here's the story. When Vespasian came to destroy Jerusalem, he said to the Jerusalemites, "Fools, why do you seek to destroy the city, and why do you seek to burn down the temple? For what do I ask of you, but you send me one bow and one arrow, and I will leave you?" Okay, they said to him, "Just as we went out against the first two and killed them, so too we will go out before you and kill you." This statement shows us is a window into the psychology of the Biryonim, of the rebel party. What is it that they say? Look, we went out against your predecessors. I don't know exactly who the predecessors are here. Doesn't matter. You could pick Pharaoh. You could pick Sancheriv. You could pick previous Roman kings. It doesn't matter who they are. They believed that Hashem had their back, and we're going to get rid of you too, Vespasian. When Yochanan Ben Zakkai heard this, he sent for the men of Jerusalem and said to them, "My sons, why are you destroying the city?" Now Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai is putting it on the rebels. He's saying, "What are you guys doing?" This shows Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai squarely in the peace party. This is the text which really says Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, the pragmatist, is saying, guys, you cannot destroy the city. You know what? There's no way to defeat the Romans. You cannot rely on the idea that Hashem will save you. And why do you want to burn down the temple? For what does he ask of you? Behold, he asks for nothing more than one bow and one arrow. A token disarmament. And he will leave you alone. They said to him, just as we went down against the two before him and killed them, so too we will go out before him and kill him. Again, you see the mind of the zealot party. Vespasian had men stationed near the walls of Jerusalem, and everything they heard he would write down on an arrow and send it over the walls. And they wrote on an arrow and shot over the walls, saying, Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai is one of the admirers of Caesar. And he says to the people of Jerusalem, so basically, what do they write on this? They drop leaflets, propaganda. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, it's fake news. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai is a secret supporter of Caesar, right? Every night, Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai opens up his picture of his "Make Judea Great Again" hat, and it has a picture of Caesar on the back. Ich weiß. But they're basically paint him as a traitor. And after Yochanan Ben Zakkai said it one day and a second and a third, they did not accept it from him. So now people had turned against Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So he sent for his students, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yoshua. And what do? He said to them, my sons, stand and take me out of here. Make me a coffin and I will sleep in it. And Rabbi Elazar held him at the feet and Rabbi Yoshua held him at the head, and they walked around him until sundown, until they got to the gates of Jerusalem. The gatekeeper said to them, "Who is this?" They said, "It's a corpse. And don't you know that it's forbidden to leave a corpse in Jerusalem overnight?" "Of course, everybody knows that." They said to him, "If he's dead, take him out of the city." And they took him out, and they carried him till they got to Vespasian. They opened the coffin, and he stood before him. He, Vespasian, said to him, "You are Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, what can I give you?" So in this story, Caesar gives something to Yochanan Ben Zakkai because Yochanan Ben Zakkai has been a proponent of peace. He said to him, "I request nothing other than Yavne v'chachameha, Yavne and her wise man. The other thing I ask for is the lineage of Rabban Gamliel." So in this story, he only asks for two things. Remember that. Only two things. Yavne and the lineage of Gamliel. "I will go and teach my students there and establish a house of prayer," maybe a house of study would be a better translation, "and do there all the commandments." And he said to him, "Go, I've granted what you wish." Okay, so that's the first telling of the story. Second telling of the story is the Talmud in Gittin. The Talmud in Gittin says, as the Gemara relates, Abba Sikra. So I want you to remember this name, Abba Sikara. Does anybody know? My father probably does. But what does Sikara mean? Abba Sikara does not. That's his mama didn't call him. He wasn't born, and they said, "Oh, thank you, thank you, Hashem. We're gonna V'yikara Shemo Sikara." Right? That wasn't a Jewish name. Why is he called Abba Sikara?
The Sikarim were zealots, weren't they? So he's the father of the zealots.
They were the dagger men. They were the Sinn Fein, if you will. They were the extreme, violent arm of the rebellion, right? The ones who carried daggers under their cloaks and secretly stabbed centurions, right? So he's Abba Sikara. He's the head of these guys. So that's Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai's nephew. And he's the leader of the Biryonim. The Biryonim are, again, the rebel party. And he's the son of the sister of Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So, by the way, does this sound familiar? Right? You go to Rosh Hashanah dinner, and one uncle watches Fox News and comes with his Make America Great hat, and one cousin has just come from a Black Lives Matter protest and is wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Right? And now you're all sitting down to Rosh Hashanah dinner. Because you can imagine, this is not a new thing. Right? You imagine Rosh Hashanah dinner at Yochanan Ben Zakkai's house? So him and Abba Sikara don't see eye to eye politically. So this is what happened. So the son of the sister of Yochanan Ben Zakkai, Yochanan Ben Zakkai sent a message to him, "Come to me in secret." He came, and Yochanan Ben Zakkai said to him, "Until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? You guys, you're so pure with your motives, so pure with getting rid of Rome. Guess what? We're all going to starve to death in this, right? We got to make peace." Abba Sikara said to him, "What can I do for if I say something to them, they will kill me?" In other words, this is sort of an admission that when you foment the hate against Rome, it's not as if your leadership is based on your charisma. Sometimes it's based on their hatred of somebody else. And if you've already gotten that wheel moving, you can't turn it backwards. So he said, "I can't do anything." But Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai said to him, "All I need from you is show me a method that I will be able to leave the city. And it is possible that through this there will be some small salvation." Abba Sikara said to him, "This is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare so that word will spread about your ailing condition. Afterwards, bring something putrid and place it near you, so that people say you have died and you're decomposing. And then have your students enter to bring you to burial, and let no one come in, so that the zealots will not notice that you are still light. As the zealots know that a living person is lighter than a dead person." Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai did this. Rabbi Elazar entered from one side and Rabbi Yeshua from the other side to take him out. And when they arrived at the entrance of the city, just for the sake of time, we'll skip over the parts of the fact that the guards wanted to test Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. They wanted to stab him, but they realized it's not such a good idea for such a important rabbi. And so, when Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai reached there, meaning Vespasian's camp, the Roman camp, he said, "Greetings to you, the king, greetings to you, the king." Vespasian said to him, "You are liable for 2 death penalties, one because I am not the king, and yet you call me king, and furthermore, if I am the king, why didn't you come to me until now?" So Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai said to him, "For what you said about yourself, I am not a king. In truth, you are a king. If not now, then in the future. And if you are not a king, Jerusalem will not be handed over into your hands. As it is written, and Lebanon shall fall by the mighty one." He goes through an exegesis of why it is that Jerusalem will only fall to a king. Skipping down, he says, "If I am a king, why didn't you come to me until now? There are zealots among us who did not allow us to do this. I couldn't leave." Understanding that Yochanan Ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple, Vespasian said to him, "If there is a barrel of honey and a snake is wrapped around it, wouldn't they break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In similar fashion, I'm forced to destroy the city of Jerusalem in order to kill the zealots barricaded within it." Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was silent and did not answer. In light of this, Rav Yosef later read the following verse about him, and some say that it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. "I am the Lord who turns wise men backwards and makes their knowledge foolish." As Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai should have said the following to Vespasian in response: "In such a case we take tongs and remove the snake and kill it, and this way we leave the barrel intact. So too you should kill the rebels and leave the city as it is." So what does this say? This says that there were rabbis who a generation later, Rabbi Akiva lives at 135 CE. This is 68 CE, right? There are rabbis who live a good generation later, 60, 70 years later, who are criticizing Yochanan Ben Zakkai because at that moment he should have asked for Jerusalem. No. This just shows you, I think, in the long arc of history, Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai comes out the winner in this argument. Yochanan Ben Zakkai is, we'll see, especially when I get to my last slide, why he is genius. But I want us to appreciate that Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai remained a controversial figure even in his day, because there were rabbis who said he should have asked for Jerusalem, and he didn't do that. What does he ask for? So this is the 3 wishes of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. The 3 wishes are, he asks, Vespasian says, "Ask for whatever you want and I will give it to you." This is the same story, just pasted in from a different place. He says, "Give me Yavne and her sages, ten li Yavne v'chachameha, v'shushilta de Rabban Gamliel, and the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel, v'asavta de misyan le Rebbe Tzadok." And I want a doctor to heal Rebbe Tzadok. Tzadok was a Kohen, and he had been fasting at great length in order to save Jerusalem. And so Yochanan Ben Zakkai is going to look for 3 things. He's going to look for Yavne, a place for the Sanhedrin, the wise men, the academy to move to. He's going to look for a reprieve for Rabbi Yochanan for Rabban Gamliel. We'll have to dig deeper into that in a minute. And he's going to ask for a doctor for Rebbe Tzadok. Now, these are the historians' reactions to Yochanan Ben Zakkai. This is Jacob Neusner. Jacob Neusner is without question the single most prolific Jewish historian of the 20th century. He wrote literally thousands of books. It is a complete mystery of modern times. If someone were to ask me, Rosenblatt, to tell me a miracle of modern day, I would say the number of books published by Jacob Neusner. That would be my miracle. But anyway, Yochanan Ben Zakkai alone had another perception of matters. It was he who before the war counseled caution in the manner of a sober Roman, and afterward he acted boldly to hold on to the past and preserve it. So what's so interesting is Neusner says, you have to understand Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Yochanan Ben Zakkai was a man of moderation when he thought that was best, and a man of intense action when he thought that was best. A very dynamic figure. A lot of what we're going to look at now comes from the work of Gedalia Alon, who was a Polish Jew who wrote a remarkable book called The Jews in Their Land in the Talmudic Age, which I have to thank my father for. Here's my copy of it, and it's got a very nice little inscription, "To Andy from Dad with Love," which I read not least of all because my mother's watching. Hopefully my father's watching also. And this book has been fantastic for preparing this lecture. Now, what are the things that Alon says are challenging the Jewish people at this point? So here are the challenges to statehood. First of all, the Romans have eliminated Judea, and they have called it Palestina. Tell me that's not prescient change there. Number two, the Jews no longer represent the majority population. One of the estimations, probably an exaggerated estimation, one of the estimations of the number of people who died in the Great Revolt was 600,000. So the Jews are now a slim fraction of what they once were.
The Bar Kokhba revolt, right?
No. Bar Kokhba is 135. We're 70, right? So you're another 65 years before Bar Kokhba. There's a stable agrarian. There was a stable agrarian economy, but now there's not, and the money that used to go to the temple is now going to Rome. The half shekel is now a tax that goes to Rome. The leadership is in question. The only stable leadership which comes out of this is the Prushim, the Pharisees, but the Sadducees are gone. The Kohen Gadol is gone. There's no remnant of the family of Agrippa or Herod or any kind of kingship. The diaspora still looks to Israel, but it's not. It's going to become a wrestling match. Where is the central, the center point of the Jewish people? And just to give you a sort of an interesting example, if we went back 100 years in 1920, and you asked yourself, where is the intellectual center of the Jewish people? So you might have said Berlin, you might have said Warsaw, you might have said Lithuania. No one was going to say Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem wasn't where things were centered. And so you have that tug of war then that's going to happen between diaspora and Israel, and active resistance to occupation, at least between the years immediately following 70 CE, 70 to 85, which is the last active years of Yochanan Ben Zakkai. There is no active resistance against the Romans. Alon comes up with a very, very interesting theory. The interesting theory is that Yavne give me Yavne and her wise men, is that Yavne is a refugee camp. That what happens is that, first of all, Yavne is, if you were Yochanan Ben Zakkai and you wanted to take the Jews to another city, Leipzig, I know which city you would choose. Which city would you choose? Tzfat. I knew that was going to be your choice. You would have taken them to Tzfat. Give me some other potential places that you might go.
Where is Yavne? Is that Jaffa?
It's near Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ashkelon area.
My brother lives in Yavne.
But you'll get a map very soon. But I'm still asking the question: if you were Yochanan Ben Zakkai, where would you ask people to go to? Where would you ask for? There was no Tel Aviv.
What about Beersheba?
Okay, there we go. Now we're talking Beersheba, Hebron. Right.
Hebron.
Yeah, you could have asked for Hebron. There are a lot of places with a lot of Jewish history. Yavne's got no Jewish history, so that's his first point. Yavne's got no Jewish history. Secondly, Yavne is mentioned together with Lida and other places where Jews were taken, Gofna, places where there were majority non-Jews. They were considered places that you could put Jews in, that they could be, I guess, watched properly, so that they didn't foment more rebellion. Now, largely, Alon's theory that Yavne is a refugee camp is an argument from silence. There's not strong evidence to this point. However, what he says is, if you're Vespasian, as nice as this rabbi is, you're not about to grant him some major request. What Alon thinks is that what happened was that even those who were essentially oriented towards peace amongst the Jews were deported by the Romans. Deportation was a standard practice in the Roman Empire, and so the assumption that that is what happened makes a lot more sense from a historical perspective. The other pieces of this puzzle is that you'll see that most of the people who, the way Josephus describes the fall of Jerusalem, almost nobody survived that. There were very few men who survived that, which brings us to the next part of the three requests. The lives of the rebel party were forfeit. So when he asks for Yavne and her wise men, maybe he's asking for the fact that I want special permission for some of these people who may have once been aligned against Rome to come with me. But perhaps most specifically, the second request, Rabban Gamliel, as we noted earlier, had advocated for war against Rome. Josephus tells us that his father, Shimon ben Gamliel, their names alternate generations. So the Gamliel has a son named Shimon ben Gamliel, who is the head of the court at the time of the revolt breaks out. His son Gamliel is a hereditary heir to being head of the rabbinical court, and he was likely aligned with the pro-rebel party, and so Yochanan Ben Zakkai has to get special permission for him to come back. Yochanan Ben Zakkai is head of the court for 15 years before Rabban Gamliel is reinstated. Rabban Gamliel can't be reinstated. Maybe he can't be reinstated because that was maybe part of the deal that the Romans had, which is he can't take the mantle of leadership for 15 years. We'll give you his life. But Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai understands that in order to have a Sanhedrin, a rabbinical court that is recognized by the Jews, it will ultimately have to be headed by somebody named Gamliel. And this idea of a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok is also very important, because Rabbi Tzadok represents the Kohanim, and we need to have some continuity with the Kohanim. All right, now Yavne. Here's the red dot is Yavne, and Jerusalem is the square slightly to the southwest of that. So, to understand what Yavne was, Gedaliah alone says it was the equivalent to tying up the nation's vital nerve after it had been severed, so that it could continue not only to function but even to develop. Judaism at that time was entirely centered around the temple. All Jewish practice was centered around the temple. Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, Shavuot, everything was temple-centered. All of a sudden, like that, it was gone. So Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai has to put all of this back together. The Sanhedrin sat right next to the temple. The two institutions were fused at the hip. So you'll see how Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai is going to stitch all of these things together. Number one, the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us, and you forgive me, I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly. He says, "Barishonah hayakol echav echad mimaneh tamidav." At the beginning, everybody would give ordination to his own students. And it tells us this is the first recorded moment of rabbinic ordination in this perhaps semi-formal sense. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, Minat Rabbi Lezer, Vet Rabbi Yoshua et Rabbi Akiva. So you see the lineage. The idea of giving smicha, of giving rabbinic ordination, starts with Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. He essentially formalizes this institution that then carries us for the next 2,000 years. This is just a slide which shows you that Rabban Gamliel was a wanted man. This is not just for the sake of truth. This is not an accurate wanted poster from the time of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, in case anybody was confused. But this is an accurate portrayal of the Talmud, which says that when the wicked turners Rufus plowed the Beit HaMikdash, a decree was issued against Rabban Gamliel for execution. So Rabban Gamliel was a wanted man, and Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai gets his reprieve. But maybe what really this entire lecture comes down to is the following. There are 9 edicts of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. for the sake of simplicity and time, I'm just going to walk through them in a way as Neusner walks you through them. Jacob Neusner was that very prolific professor that I mentioned a couple slides ago. He says the temple is destroyed in August, in Av, of the year 70 CE. So they come to the year 70 CE, they come to Rosh Hashanah. And they say, okay, but the shofar was always associated with the temple. It was only blown in the temple. It was blown in the place where they would establish the new year, right? That's where the court is there, the witnesses come, they see the new moon, that's where they establish the new year. Where are we going to blow the shofar this year? So the very first edict of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai is Rosh Hashanah that year. Chevra, you blow the shofar where the court is. Where's the court? Where's the new moon sanctified? So these are edicts number 1 and 3 on this list. Blowing the shofar outside the temple, and the new moon is sanctified in the location of the Beit Din. We are going to sanctify the new moon. We're establishing the calendar here in Yavne, and we're blowing the shofar here in Yavne. And so it was. Then shofar started being blown outside of Jerusalem. We have textual evidence from letters from Alexandria, Egypt, from Philo Judaeus of the same period of time, where he says as long as the temple was standing, they did not blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah in the shul in Egypt. I know, hard to believe. They didn't always blow shofar in shul. You had to go to Jerusalem for the shofar. Yochanan Ben Zakkai takes what was a temple-centered practice and says, okay, now the holy temple of the Jewish people, the 4 cubits of Jewish law, and it is completely being repackaged. So what was the next problem? Okay, we got through Rosh Hashanah. What's the next problem? Sukkot. The lulav was only carried in the Beit HaMikdash. Yochanan Ben Zakkai's second edict, which is 2, carrying the lulav outside of the temple. He then says that there is good reason to believe also that come Pesach he was the one who instituted the first Seder at home, because before that everybody would go up to Jerusalem, do their Karban Pesach, right? They would wrap the matzah and the lettuce and the shawarma, otherwise known as the Karban Pesach, together and have a beautiful Eish Tanur there. It was amazing. But Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, by the way, you should not blame him for the cardboard matzah. That's not his fault.
But Rabbi, may I ask? Sorry, may I
sure.
Ask? As you taught us around Ezra, and bringing of the Torah outside of the temple, and obviously the first, I guess the second exile, if you count the first being Joseph, but that even at that time, before the reinstitution of the temple, that none of these things were occurring outside the temple or in Babylon?
No, I don't. Yeah, I think that. So good point. Ezra moves Torah study outside of the temple.
Right.
But we don't have
but none of these other elements.
But ritual, and maybe prayer service also starts at the time of Ezra. So Ezra is perhaps a forerunner of Yochanan Ben Zakkai in that sense. But these rituals, right? Another problem they had is that new grain was only permitted by the Omer ritual, the Omer sacrifice. And Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai said, okay, well, we're just going to use the date instead of the ritual. He has to set up a Judaism which is now no longer centered on the temple in Jerusalem. It's centered on the study of Torah and the practice of Torah in the synagogue in the home. And that is the major shift of weight that happens at the time of Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. And it's audacious. And what is amazing about him is that he takes this mantle of leadership for 15 years and then hands it back to Gamliel. Gamliel, remember, was a wanted man. But Yochanan Ben Zakkai knows that in order for Judaism to survive, he has to give over the leadership to the descendant of David, the princes, the rabbinic princes of the Jewish people. I just want to point out one other very interesting one. The Kohanim go up, number 4. Kohanim go up and bless the people without their shoes on. What Neusner says here is that there was a possibility that the priestly blessing would become a private ritual. You would go to your priest and you would give him money so that you could get your blessing, right? But Yochanan Ben Zakkai wants to preserve the Kohanim as not an individual right, but a communal institution. And so he sets up what was something which was a temple practice as a synagogue practice that requires the Levim to wash their hands and makes it into a communal fixture. It's brilliant. It's brilliant and important that this individual has such a strong vision of what community could look like and will look like, and sets it up in a way that it's going to preserve Judaism for the next 2,000 years. And so I caught this on, I think somebody wrote about this, and I just caught it briefly because I was looking for some archaeology of Yavne, and there is really none of this for this period anyway. But they were talking about some tour guide in Israel, and credit to him. And he basically says, Yavne and Masada are contemporaneous. They happen at the same time. And, Israel's motto is Masada lo yipol shenit. Masada won't fall again. But I'm going to ask you, which one is really the geography that motivates Judaism? What is the real shining historical star of Judaism? Is it Masada or is it Yavne?
It's Yavne.
Yeah, I think you hands down it's Yavne.
Because right? Judaism was saved there.
Because every Zaydi's Seder and every Bubby's gefilte fish are built on Yavne, right? The entire the shofar in the shul is built on Yavne. All of these things, the guys in Masada, it's a great story. It's a nice miniseries. Nobody ever, as far as I know, ABC never did a Yavne miniseries. Masada is a great miniseries, but Yavne is really the straw that stirs the drink of the Jewish people. That being able to reconstruct Judaism, even if Alon is right, that he was sent there because it was a refugee camp, he at least negotiated permission to set up an organized Jewish leadership that was able to completely rebuild a structure of meaning for the Jewish people. So I'm going to have to ask for your forgiveness now, because I don't even have time for questions, because I am so tightly scheduled in that I have another meeting I'm supposed to do now. So I thank you all for joining me, and it's really been so much. It's been I'm really glad that we're back on this now together, and thank you for joining. And please send me, if you have questions, please email me. We hope to also have a recording of this. It's also, by the way, now this has been live on Facebook as well. Okay.
Thank you so much. Kol hakavod to your mom. Most importantly, for joining us 3 hours later. Okay.
That's right.
Erev tov.
Okay.
Laila tov.
Laila tov.
Laila tov.